Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 12th Annual RAIN Conference and first virtual RAIN Conference. I'm Tracy Bralla, VP of Ecosystem Development for the University City Science Center. Each year when we start planning this event, our team begins the process by throwing out ideas, trying to figure out what themes are relevant to the moment and then are also very evergreen to the ecosystem. When we chose the theme adaptation in January, we immediately thought of a number of examples in our community that could be very relevant for conversations about how the ecosystem has evolved and changed and is very evergreen. Little did we know at the time how necessary adaptation would be for survival and sanity, as the next several months would certainly unfold and test all of our adaptation skills. We hope you enjoy today's conversation and fantastic lineup of speakers. Before we get started, we would especially like to thank our sponsors for allowing us to make RAIN happen. Thank you to our conference sponsor, Independence Blue Cross and BPHL. I would like to introduce Michelle Heisten, Director of Innovation at Independence Blue Cross and Executive Director, I can't speak, of BPHL, to say a few words before she sits down with Travis Sheridan to have a fireside chat.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see faces. I see so many folks that I know, and it's really lovely to be with you guys. And I'm really excited for RAIN. I don't think there could be a more appropriate topic, right? So I know you guys picked adaptation before, but boy, it means like more than ever at this point in all of our lives. So really excited to see you all. As Tracy said, in my day job, I head up innovation at Independence Blue Cross. So a lot of adaptation happening there and in everything that we're doing. And in my kind of side hustle, I get to help put on this innovation festival called BPHL. And before we jump into our fireside chat today, I wanted to give a little bit of a shameless plug and ask y'all to attend BPHL. So it is a 3-day innovation festival. We are primarily virtual this year, like everything else, although we will have some socially distant approved interactions around the city. So think things like an innovation scavenger hunt that you can do on your own or with the people that you are quarantining with. And we'll have some other things around town for you to check out. But really the bulk of it is going to be virtual content. It's happening September 15th to 17th. The University City Science Center is one of our partners among many. I see Temple is on the line and some other folks. I see people from the city are on as well. So we have a lot of partners across the city, and I just wanted to let everyone know it's happening. It's entirely free this year. We're focused on recovery as our theme. And because of that, there's an option to donate to the PHL COVID-19 Fund. So you can register today at bphlfest.com. And I think that's why I'm particularly excited to be here and talking to Travis Sheridan today, who I'll introduce in just a minute, because Travis is all about building community. And that was one of our big goals with BPHL, is building and connecting the innovation community we have across Philadelphia and really this year beyond, right? Because now that we're virtual, we get to all be together, which is kind of awesome. So I think we're going to show a quick recap video of last year so you can get a flavor for what the festival is all about, and then we'll jump into our fireside chat.
We're the birthplace of America. This is where innovation started here in this country.
Good morning, everyone.
There's so many great speakers and opportunities, and I think there's something for everyone, and it's all over the city.
She's from right here of Wayne, Pennsylvania. Please welcome Abby Jacobson.
In events like BPHL, we start collaborating, we start talking across business sectors and start finding solutions for the city.
Tracy Ellis Ross,
You know, when I first said I was going to put chili on Cheeto, you know what they said? You're going to ruin the brand. Today it's $1 billion a year. All because I said yes. What hit?
Thanks, guys. So that was BPHL last year. You saw all kinds of places across town, like the Science Center. We won't be in person this year, but we'll still be together. So we hope you'll come and check it out. We'll actually be posting our agenda next week and some of our speakers next week. And speaking of speakers, I'm really excited to get this conversation started because I think it's incredibly relevant for everything that we're thinking about in my life. And building community right now is probably maybe more important than ever, right? So I want to introduce Travis Sheridan. Travis is the former president of the Venture Cafe Global Institute, where he was responsible for the growth and expansion of the organization. He is also the founding executive director of Venture Cafe St. Louis. Today, Travis continues his work of building inclusive communities by serving as the first chief community officer at Wexford Science and Technology. He leads Wexford's overall community engagement strategy. He identifies new partners and initiatives to add to the knowledge community portfolio and develops funding mechanisms to increase opportunities for underrepresented innovators, which couldn't be more important, right? So really excited to get to talk with Travis. Hi, Travis.
Hi, thanks for having me. Great to be here virtually.
Yeah, thanks for being here virtually. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
So, I guess let's just jump right in and we'll see where the conversation goes. Does that sound good?
Sounds great, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to start with Venture Cafe because every Thursday night we're here together for Venture Cafe. So as someone who helped launch Venture Cafe locations nationally and internationally, you've really interacted with people in all stages of business, both individuals and organizations. And today is all about adaptation. So can you talk about some examples of adaptation that you've seen be really successful?
Sure. I'm going to share one that is a really strange story. A gentleman walked in to my office. When you work with entrepreneurs, you have the luxury, it's not really a burden, but it is a luxury to hear ideas from everybody, right? And I generally will tell persons that I don't get bored with their idea. I want to hear them. But this was probably about 6-7 years ago, and this gentleman walked in and he had a device that he made, and it was a holder for the club that goes on your steering wheel, right? He had the little mechanism you put on a steering wheel. And he had spent, prior to meeting me, about 10 years developing this. He sunk approximately $75,000 into producing it. He had a garage full of ideas, or full of products. And his question to me was, how much more money do I need to spend in order to take this to market? And my glib response was, enough money to build a time machine to go back in time to when the club was relevant, and you'll actually make more money on the time machine than you will selling that product. Because he started it before everybody had automatic door locks and alarms as a standard product in their car. But the way that he adapted was quite interesting. He had this product, and we sat there and looked at it, and he realized that he had a brother-in-law that lived in Seattle. And while this device was really created to hold the club, it also held umbrellas really well. And what he realized is that and we probably all, this is a rain conference, so we'll make it relevant. When you need an umbrella, it's never with you, right? You leave your car and it's sunny, you walk out and you don't know where your umbrella is. And so he ended up moving this product quickly and actually moving it and continued to produce it as an umbrella holder for your car. And I just thought that was such an interesting example of an entrepreneur who had a singular mindset and focus on this product is for this problem. And that problem disappeared during the development phase. And I think that happens a lot with entrepreneurs is they cannot move as fast as maybe a big company can, or they don't have the resources to take something to market, or even worse, they spend a lot of money trying to perfect something instead of getting a minimum viable product out into the community. And so I just thought that was hilarious that he ended up going into the umbrella holding business. Again, not a lot of innovation there, but he was able to move product, recouped his initial investment, and still made a little bit of extra money. And then I want to answer it one other way when I look at communities and how communities have adapted. And I'll use Tokyo, Japan as a great example. We launched Venture Cafe in Tokyo about 2.5 years ago. And one of the challenges in Tokyo is it's not a very entrepreneurial community. The Japanese people by culture and custom are risk averse. As one person told me, if you fail in Japan, then your great grandkids will be known as the great grandkids of a failure. And the safest route is to graduate from university and go work for one of the big corporates. In fact, they call people salarymen, like that is your job. You go get a job with Honda or Toyota or Mitsubishi, and that is your career trajectory. And the corporates really were noticing that their level of innovation and productivity was shrinking because there wasn't this entrepreneurial mindset. And so by Venture Cafe, and we won't take all the credit for it with Venture Cafe, but one of the roles that Venture Cafe played was helping people just get into the entrepreneurial mindset again and show people that it's safe and comfortable and that risks can take place and failure is possible. And you don't have to be the great grandfather or the great grandchild of a failure if something didn't work out. And we have seen a number of corporates participating in Venture Cafe in Tokyo now because they want their employees to be a bit more entrepreneurial. So yeah, one example from a very tangible entrepreneur, another one where it looks at like cultural adaptation.
Yeah. No, I love that. And props for the rain joke. Well done. But no, I think that's incredible, right? I mean, I think even maybe especially with COVID and the situations we're in now, it's finding new uses for old things, right? That's part of what I think innovation can be all about. So I think your first example highlights that really beautifully. How about flip side? Have you seen people attempt to adapt and just places where it totally missed the mark?
Yeah. Again, I like to think of things culturally. I was invited to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to talk about innovation, and they were looking at considering a venture cafe or a CIC and that type of environment. And after spending 3 days in the community, meeting with a number of leaders and folks in the ecosystem, there were things there was feedback that I gave them that might have been harsh, but it was very real. They wanted to create a culture of innovation, but they had things that were stacked against them. First of all, there's not a lot of equality, especially as it relates to women and women's freedom to be able to work and work outside the home. Secondly, the LGBT community is not embraced there. And third, civil discourse and civil disobedience, raising your hand and speaking out against something isn't really a culture that exists. And so I explained to them that it's real, Venture Cafe can't solve things. Like, we can't come into an environment that doesn't have some cornerstones necessary for innovation. And a lot of those cornerstones are a culture or a willingness to embrace equality and different thinking, and letting the misfits be misfits. And so that's an example of a community one. And then one as a cultural one, again, this is a very strange example, but when my childhood pastor walked into my office. It sounds like a really bad beginning of a joke, but my childhood pastor walked into my office and he wanted to get into a new business. He wanted, for some reason, to start selling bidets. That was going to be his business. And we can make as many jokes about holy water as you want. I don't care. But the reason why it was going to be difficult for him to adapt and really move the business forward was he saw the novelty of the bidet, right? Of course it's accepted and used all around the world. In the United States, it's not as much. And he wasn't taking into consideration the cultural barriers of a product like that. Ultimately what I realized he wanted to do, and by the way, I have to give a plug to the name he came up with because it's the funniest business name I ever heard. It was called Bidet Mate, and his tagline was for a clean feeling down under, say bidet mate. I'll remind you, this was my childhood pastor.
That's amazing.
It's a great business name.
Yeah.
But so he was wanting to reduce the anxiety around bidets and making them a lot more fun. In reality, when I talked to him a little bit more and learned about why he was wanting to do this business, is he said that there are a number of people that have mobility issues due to disability or morbid obesity, and they just can't clean themselves, right? Like, a bidet has a very real medical purpose. And this is another example I like to think about when I talk to entrepreneurs. Being cute and novel is great. It'll make people laugh. It will get you maybe go viral online. But if you're solving a real problem, then your brand has to be aligned to that real problem. And if you're not able to adapt, like changing the mindset, and he was so excited because he had already trademarked it. Like, he went down a path that was way too far and did not do the right research and talk to the right people to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. I will never forget that name, but I think, I think you wrote a blog not long ago that I read around aligning your values with what you write about and how you talk about your products. Right. And I think that's what you're highlighting here. So that makes a lot of sense. I want to go back to the first example you gave And I want to pivot for a minute and
Sure.
come back to a couple of lines that have come up. But I think one is what I really appreciate about the work that you do is a focus on inclusivity. And you talked about in your first example of an adaptation that didn't go well, you know, you were in a place that really didn't value the inclusivity, and therefore it made it a lot harder to build this innovative culture. Can you just talk about, you know, how you've seen an attempt to be more inclusive, or not an attempt maybe, but how have you seen that play out in a way that's meaningful and works well, right? How can companies or communities be more inclusive in their innovation efforts?
So I think a lot of it has to do with the difference between invitation and access, right? I think oftentimes, whether it's an organization or a corporation, we will say all are invited, right? And then when the they don't show up, we say, we blame them. We say, it's, you know, they didn't want to come anyway, or it's on them. And, you know, it's up to the organization to create the pathways of access, not just to simply open the doors and say that people are innovative. And one of those pathways is that when a person does come in, they have to see other people that look like them. They don't want to be the only African-American or the only woman or the only disabled person, less able person at an event. And so one of the ways that we've tackled this through Venture Cafe, and this was something that I learned very early on when we launched in St. Louis. You know, doing a weekly event gives you an opportunity to make some mistakes all along the way, and you could pivot and adjust. But there was one week when we sent the agenda out, and all the speakers, 12 to 15 speakers, were all male speakers. And a board member, one of my board members, had emailed me right away and said, "Travis, I don't know what the hell happened, but you dropped the ball on this one." And in my mind, I knew, well, there were two speakers that dropped out. Like, I had all of these excuses. Last week wasn't like this, like that. Next week won't be like that. But instead of getting defensive, I just simply said, "You're absolutely right. We dropped the ball. It will never happen again." And what we quickly did is we knew that the way to, quote unquote, control having a diverse audience participate is through who we put on panels and in thought leadership positions. You know, the nights that we partnered with the National Black MBA Association, we had more Black entrepreneurs participating. The nights that we partner with, you know, with female-led accelerator programs, we have more women participating. And so we became very intentional on who we put into positions of thought leadership. And we knew that that was part of the power that we had as a platform, that we could elevate voices that historically haven't been elevated. And that's a first step in many steps that we were able to take, but it was one that was very tangible. And now, I mean, you know, Tracy's on and Gary's on, and the team in Philadelphia do a wonderful job curating a diverse and inclusive community of thought leaders. And that has become the standard across Venture Cafe.
I love that. You know, I really appreciate that. And I think using this kind of a platform to make sure you're magnifying the right voices is so important. I was oddly having a conversation with a friend this morning who's a Latina woman in charge of a large group at a pretty large business in the city. And she said, you know, having a seat at the table is different than having a voice at the table. And it's that, it's not just inviting people in, but it's giving, you know, people the power to share and to be part of that. So I love that.
Well, I'm gonna say one other thing.
Yeah.
You know, especially, this is not about race or gender, but it's mostly about young people. I have been fighting against the young friends of and junior boards of, you know, these things, and especially in the nonprofit community, inviting younger people in to fill these ceremonial roles of patting them on the head and saying, "I know you don't have money to donate, but can you manage our social media?" Like these things that are just really patronizing to young people. And if you think about why people are invited to boards, they're invited to boards because they have a certain level of leadership, and leadership is about influence. And so we don't want to dismiss the fact that a person younger than us has a sphere of influence. They have a sphere of power that may not be the financial power that boards look for, but it could be, you know, different thoughts, different ways of thinking, different audiences that they can engage with. So when we're bringing people to the table, and this is another, you know, tenet of Venture Cafe, everybody is considered a contributor. Like, everybody contributes something, whether it's time, talent, energy, financial resources. Everybody, if we view everybody as contributors, as assets that add value to a community, then we actually look for those valuable pieces in people. If we say, you know what, we need rich people on our board, then you're only going to look for rich people, and that's going to be a very small and homogenous group.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I love that. So you mentioned that Venture Cafe puts on programming each week. Not only does each location put on programming each week, there are 5 hours of programming every Thursday, which is a tremendous feat. I mean, you know, anybody who's planned an event knows that is no joke. But you also talked about in your very first example about the culture in Japan and building people who are able to adapt and to innovate. So I want to talk about folks who are event planners and kind of, you know, in the business of doing this work and how that translates to building team members that are more nimble, because that's, I think, where we all are, right? All of our teams right now need to think differently. So how do you prime, you know, how have you yourself been primed, or how do you prime your team to be good with change and able to adapt quickly?
When Venture Cafe in Rotterdam launched, I was there for the launch event, and the woman that was the program manager at the time had come from an event planning background where she worked at a university and planned a big conference that happened twice a year. And so her run of show for the day had everybody starting for a Thursday gathering, starting at 9 a.m. and everything mapped out until 8:30 p.m. And at the end, when we were debriefing and going around the room, I was asking people what they thought, asking the team what they thought, and she wouldn't answer. And finally, the third time I asked a question, she just stood up, started crying, and ran out of the room. And so I wanted to let her have that moment because she was decompressing. And I spoke with her the next day, and you know, she can't put into a weekly event the same energy and focus that you put into a semi-annual event. And so I told her, I don't want you to be careless, but I want you to care less. You know, every Thursday, what I tell people about a Thursday gathering is strive for 80% right. Allow that 20% to be messy. Just make sure it's a different 20% every week. You know, and that type of freedom, and if we communicate that not just to the team, but to the attendees, to the ambassadors, to the speakers, if we reduce that anxiety a little bit and allow for the messiness to take place, that's actually where a lot of the innovation and the beauty starts happening. If we over-program something, then we don't leave any room for adaptability, right? And adaptation within the program. Invariably, you're going to have a speaker that falls out. You're going to have a speaker that's really bad. You're going to have a person that drinks too much of the free beer and wine. Like, these are things that happen. And we have plans to address that. But the other thing that I've noticed, I used to have the teams, when I would hire, especially in St. Louis, there's this great documentary, I think it's called 7 Days to Air or 6 Days to Air. It's about how the team at South Park produces an episode in 6 days to make it relevant. You know, Venture Cafe is a major production. It's like putting a conference, a major conference on a weekly basis. And so there is a lot of process that has to go into it. And there's a lot of social engineering that's required so those serendipitous collisions occur. But the serendipity is the user experience. The user experience should never be the over-engineered piece of it.
I think too, I love that. And I think too, it makes it so much more accessible to people, right? If people don't feel like this is this highly polished thing that always runs a certain way, I think it makes people who are newer to the scene feel like, I can go there, I can be part of this, right? And that's really important. Innovation stuff can feel intimidating. It is life, right? Well, God, especially now, like, I might get a delivery, I hope not, but like, you know, things might happen around us, right? You just don't know. And I think it just makes it so much more accessible. And that's the beauty in building community, right? Making it accessible to everybody. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. So what prompts adaptation? And that sounds crazy because, you know, I think right now we know what's prompting adaptation, right? We have no option, but talk about pre-COVID-19, if we can remember. It feels like 1,000 years ago, but it was only in March that this all really started here. You know, pre-COVID-19, what are some of the other circumstances that cause organizations or individuals to adapt?
I really think it's difficult to adapt without some type of crisis or pressure to adapt. I mean, humans, by nature, we like to be comfortable. Adaptation requires quite a bit of risk. But if we look at COVID-19, there was a forced adaptation. I think it's the difference between trying to manage an evolution and manage a revolution, right? I think that most adaptations that companies go through should be a series of evolutions. And, you know, looking at, you know, if you have a product line and you say, we can't have, you know, I don't want the medicine I take to be 80% right. Like, I need some level of certainty in that area. But there should always be this opportunity for a company to look at evolving its product offering, its service offering, how it engages its employees. And so a spirit of evolution is really critical. But all too often, any small amount of evolution is perceived to be revolutionary, and it's really not. The famous examples I always think of is when I was in college, I worked for Blockbuster Video. Kids on the call, Blockbuster Video used to be this. So we used to go to stores and like check out movies, and Blockbuster laughed at Netflix, right? And Kodak didn't do well. They were a film processing company. Evidently now they're getting into drug manufacturing, but that's a whole nother story. But Kodak also didn't adapt, and they were replaced. I wonder what it takes, and I don't know the exact answer to this. I wonder what it takes for a CEO to have the courage to cannibalize their own business, because that's really where adaptation comes from. I just read a story about Jeff Bezos, and Amazon was a bookseller, right? And the addition of Kindle was going to cannibalize their core business. Yet they still moved forward, and of course Amazon's doing well now. But there has to be some courage by the entrepreneur or the CEO or the organization to be willing to cannibalize certain parts of it. And I often think cannibalization should start with process, right? Don't cannibalize product yet, but to create a culture of evolution, look at the processes that you have. Your hiring process, right? How do you cannibalize what you used to do in hiring to make hiring a little bit more adaptive to the changing environment? And for anybody that runs a large organization, my recommendation to you right now is look at all of your job postings and job requirements. Cannibalize those and start taking out the educational requirement. Like that is one way to start. If we talk about access and equity, if we look at what we're asking people the thresholds we're asking people to jump over in order to get a job, that's a way to look at process adaptation and evolution. And it may seem revolutionary at first, but it really is a slow process. So look internally first, and if you create that culture, then you might start looking at your product and service line too.
Well, I think everything you're saying, particularly about hiring, but just about thinking about internal process, so many companies are doing that right now, right? Particularly in the wake of the George Floyd murder, people are thinking about how they can do better, how they can be more equitable. And it's looking at processes like hiring and saying, we have to blow this up and we have to think really differently, right? So I appreciate that. I think it in some ways can be easier to do with those internal processes than with products that we're going to try to take to market, but start to slowly dismantle the way we do business. And that's really important. Yeah. So how do companies start to adapt but still stay true to their core, or should they stay true to their core? Because to your point, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should totally change what you're all about. But what do you think there?
So I never really want companies to change what they're all about, right? I mean, Venture Cafe, Wexford, every company that I've been a part of I've looked to join values-driven companies, right? Like, what are those core values? For me in my personal life, equity is a core value. And then what does that look like? How can that manifest itself? Look at your value and then ask yourself, in what ways can we? In what ways can this value still exist, but be manifested in a different way? I gave a talk a long time ago about everybody in an organization being a brand manager, right? Like if you have a brand that's based on values, and the example I used to give is when I worked in banking for Citibank, and one of our brand values was securing private information of our customers. Like, that seems like a pretty good brand value. But how does that get manifested? Well, part of it gets manifested by not having covers on your screen so people can't walk by and see private information. But the other way that's manifested is making sure that your cleaning company empties the trash receptacle that's near the deposit, the check writing desk. Young people, check writing desks are these things that, all these antiquated stories I have back in the old days. And I think when you make that cleaning company's role and the mundane tasks that they might be doing still tie back to the values of the organization, then it gives those mundane tasks more emphasis. And so I try to structure it in, what is our value or our standard? What is the observed behavior, and what's the impact, right? And if you evaluate the things that way, then it's not subjective, it's very objective. If the standard is this, And the behavior is great, the impact is awesome. If the standard is this, the behavior is subpar, the impact is, it has a negative impact on the brand. And if organizations start looking at that, value, behavior, impact, then they could find new ways to, make their values come to life.
I like the value, behavior, impact. I haven't heard it explained that way, and I like that a lot. We as a tool, everybody that's watching has guaranteed heard of called the golden circle, but all about sticking to your why, right? Leading with your why. And that's, you're talking about the value, leading with your why, so that no matter how you pivot what you're doing, you're still leading from that. And that's important and keeps you centered, right? So I like that.
And
so
one of the things I was gonna say, one of the things we noticed about taking Venture Cafe, pivoting and adapting to online, is one of the easiest things to convert online was the content, right? You would sit and listen to a speaker, now we're doing it online. The biggest challenge, and what I give the teams a lot of credit for continuing to focus on this, is how do you make the shift to maintaining community online? Because everything, we all have Zoom fatigue, and it would be great to take content and translate it, but we have to also start thinking about how do we take community. And this is going to be a longer term, challenge, because we're probably going to be virtual for quite a while. So if we know that both content and community are a value of Venture Cafe, then when we're adapting, we have to see what things are compromised and how do we amplify something or adapt something in order to maintain the value of creating community.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you've seen good examples of building community online, but I feel like it's an unfair question, right? We're only in what, March, April, May, it's month 4, and it's going to take some time, right? I mean, us extroverts in particular we're dying at home, right? This is horrible. I'm so tired of seeing my family and my cat and dog, right? I'm just dying to get back to other people. So I think we still have to, we have a ways to go in truly building how we can connect better online. I think seeing people is a huge help, right? I'm a big proponent of cameras on all the time, which my team hates, but really important, right? So that we can see each other and I can see how you're feeling. I can kind of read your expressions and whatnot. So I think we have to keep going there. You talked about, we've talked a little bit about culture in different parts of the world. And I wonder if there are other places that you've noticed are really better at adaptation than others, or more open and willing to change than others. And that could be, I'm thinking a part of the world or the country, but I'd also say organization types, right? Are there types of organizations that are better at this? Is it harder for, the banking industry and insurance industry than it is for tech industries? Talk about that.
Yeah, so from a place standpoint, I would say Australia has probably been one of the locations, geographies that has been the best at adaptation. And they adapt quickly. We could see their response to COVID has been amazing. And I think the reason why the adaptation happened so quickly is they are an island. They're a small island. I mean, geographically they're large, but population-wise they're small, 24, 25 million people. And they know that they have to engage with the rest of the world. And so the sooner that they control what's going on, in this case with COVID, the sooner that they can try to, get back to life in some semblance of normalcy. Also, when you look at what their response to gun violence, right? They had one mass shooting, took away guns.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty incredible.
And I mean, they're a free and democratic country, just as the U.S. is. And then, Tracy, I promise not to get too political, but it's an environment in which there is a culture, and there's trust also. There's trust with the government, right? And I think adaptation, whether it's within an organization or within a government, adaptation does require a level of trust, so that because of the risk associated with it. So Australia has been really great at adapting. I think some of the sectors you mentioned, finance, agriculture, healthcare, it's very difficult to adapt there because of the risk associated with it and the regulation. Government is another place where it's difficult to adapt. And that's because, if you think of adaptation in alignment with innovation, both of those involve risk. And if I'm an elected official, I have to mitigate risks because too many failed risks or failed adaptations mean I won't get reelected, right? So the fear associated with a failed adaptation keeps people maintaining the status quo. The other issue with adaptation across sectors is it also starts reallocating power potentially, and that is a risk of people. When you are adapting, it often involves giving up a certain level of power and influence to trust another group for that power or influence. It requires the alignment of agendas. So I think the nonprofit sector is another place that is often slow to adapt because, well, one, they're quick to adapt when a funder has money, right? They will adapt their mission entirely in their program offering, usually to a fault because they will follow financial resources. So that's harmful adaptation. But there's also this fear of, because of maybe a scarcity mindset, of adapting because you don't want to, you don't necessarily want to give your competitors a better advantage, right? Or your competing organizations a competitive advantage. And so you continue to need to carve out what it is you truly do.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. So I know we're going to open it up to questions in a minute from the audience, but I have one last one I want to get in, and this is like the man behind the glasses. Like, tell us more. How did you end up here, right? Like, it's such an interesting career and an interesting path. And you know, I read your bio, and we know what that is. But just talk about, like, when you were a kid, were you like, I want to build innovation communities? What happened there?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a firefighter. You know,
Okay.
and
You
I
kind of are.
I was after high school, I joined the Air Force, and so I was a firefighter in the Air Force. So I got to live out that childhood dream. It's interesting to look back on a career that seems varied, and then to identify a narrative that makes sense. Even going back to my youth, I've always been a person that likes to bring people together. I'm a natural extrovert, but I've also found that, as this is part of my adaptation, up until 2016, so from birth to 2016, I never had the same street address for 2 consecutive years in my life. I was always moving to new locations, whether it's just a new apartment in a city, the same city, or moving to different towns. And so creating community, my need to create community was necessitated because of all these moves. And so I've always been one that likes to bring people together and create a new group of friends or a new community. And there was a point in my career just after grad school, I studied organizational behavior, and I was doing some consulting for companies. It was often a 20-year-old company led by a 40 to 55-year-old white male, and there was something broken in the company, and they said, Travis, you're good at finding out what's broken, help us fix it. And they would hire me, I would do an analysis, and I had to learn this trick where I would hand them the report and collect the second half of my pay, because they weren't going to like what's in the report. Like 9 times out of 10, what was in the report is the person that hired me to fix their company is the problem, right? They had created a toxic culture. And what I found is those companies usually didn't implement my suggestions. What they would do is hire another consultant to tell them what they wanted to hear. And so a friend of mine who was running a thing called a business incubator at the time, had no idea what that was. He reached out to me. We had drinks over at the bar, and he said, instead of working for 20-year-old companies that are broken, what if you could work with a brand new company and get them started in the right way that they don't have to hire you 20 years later? And I said, is that a thing? Because that sounds wonderful. And that was really my foray into working with entrepreneurs. Is our country, if we look at our Fortune 500s, a lot of those, I mean, they all started entrepreneurially. And I want an entrepreneur to get started in the right way, to have a community around them that not only supports them with motivation and morale, but also supports them financially by being customer number one, right? Our communities should be our first customers. And when that entrepreneur that might be a solo entrepreneur hires 2 people, that's amazing job growth and job creation. And and if they grow to 5 or 10 people, or they just stay at 4, that's still an amazing success story. And if I think about the Black community and the ability for the Black community and the Latinx community to be able to grow businesses and create generational wealth to try to stem the tide of systemic racism, I'm all for that.
Well, I think that's why we're so excited to have Venture Cafe in Philadelphia now. And I know, again, we're all virtual. That means we can all be everywhere. But I have a lot of city pride. I'm particularly excited to see things growing in Philadelphia, and so glad that we have the Science Center to play that role. I know we have just a minute or 2 left for questions from the audience. Anybody have a question they want to get in? Because I can keep asking all day long. Nothing, I don't see any popping up. All right.
A question was sent to me privately that I thought I would mention. It was related to Australia and the fact that they do not have a great history when it comes to their indigenous population.
Mm-hmm.
And I know and of course, the United States also does not have a great history. I would say probably most countries have failed in how they treat their indigenous population. One of the things that I have seen done in Australia that has been pretty powerful, I don't want to just refer to it as ceremonial, but I think those ceremonial things are important at first to help change a longer term culture, is they do a welcome to country or acknowledgement of country. And the acknowledgement of country, they do it at every venture cafe I've attended in Sydney. They've done it at major events, they do it. They pause for a moment and recognize the rightful owners and ancestors of the land. And that level of acknowledgement, I think it's more than we do in the United States. It is an act of humility of saying we are here, but this is not our land, and we didn't come by this land properly. That to me is a good first step. I know they're trying to do other things within Australia, but I thought that was a very powerful first step of acknowledging the wrongs that you've done and the people that have been wronged.
This might be too long an answer for the time we have left, but just along those lines, do you think, just given, I know what we're seeing in Philadelphia and likely where you are too, do you think we're starting to enter that stage as we remove statues and we, take moves like saying no more Confederate flag, right? Do you think we're approaching that stage of acknowledgement, understanding there's tons more work to be done? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting there. Of course, there's tons, like we are, and it's, again, I give young people credit. It's really being driven by the young people. So when people say kids these days, I say, yeah, kids, absolutely kids these days. They're doing amazing things. And the system, like we're starting, like these systems are breaking. COVID is breaking the system. I think COVID and then putting the murder of George Floyd and others on top of that is showing that the system is breaking. And when it breaks, we have this opportunity to rebuild it. Rotterdam, Netherlands is one of my favorite cities. And the reason I love it so much is when it was completely bombed in World War II, they decided to rebuild a city after World War II to be ready for the 21st century. Like they said, we have been broken. This is our opportunity to rebuild. I don't want acts like a war and a bombing, or I don't want more Black and brown people to die to be the breaking that we need. We're broken enough. Now let's rebuild the right way.
Yeah, that's right. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So one is, how would you view Philadelphia's progress in this area relative to other cities of similar size? What are some of the key roadblocks that Philly faces?
There's a few things that I really appreciate about Philadelphia, and I'll mention some programs specifically. The West Philadelphia Skills Initiative, right? I think that's a tremendous program of getting upskilling individuals so they can participate in this knowledge and innovation economy. I also think that where the Science Center is located, I know there's a history of distrust because of how a lot of real estate development has happened. But I've seen the Science Center making great strides and reaching out to the communities and bringing the communities in. And then you have other things that I think are driving great success in Philadelphia. Rex Philly, or the arts community in Philly, which is showing that arts is a thriving industry. Like, I know everybody gets excited about technology and innovation, but the arts industry and the arts community is a thriving, and artists are all about adaptation. So there's a lot that we can learn there. And so the more that Philadelphia will continue to bring art and science together so that both of those voices are on an equal platform, I think the better it will be long term.
Oh, it's so powerful, right? To make sure that when we talk about innovation, it's inclusive not just of people, but of industries and of organizations, yeah. Right? So I appreciate that. We have one more question that I really like, and that is, how do you define a community? When does a group of people go from being a collection of individuals to being a community? Yeah,
so I look at it as, to me, I like community with a lowercase c, not a capital C, right? I think community is informal. I live in a neighborhood. This is a community with my neighbors. But I like communities that are porous, where a person can opt in and opt out based on what their needs are. But some of the hallmarks of a community would be interdependence, or some level of shared dependence, where you can rely on this group of people. Also, more social thinking instead of individualistic thinking, like thinking about the greater good. and how my actions might impact somebody else's actions. And then the third piece is this idea that everybody that's within this group of people has something to contribute. Like we can be individuals, and I think part of the challenge in this country is while we have individual liberties, we don't necessarily have social thinking or collective thinking. If we, in a community, if we're thinking as a collective, then we could actually move as a collective. And this is where a lot of these movements have really gained steam, is it's a collection of people that are become a voting bloc, a force to be reckoned with. And that's where I think community is really powerful.
I think we have a little ways to go with being a social thinking, right? I mean, we're not there, but we are seeing it emerge. And you're right. I think particularly with everything happening in the protest movement that's continuing, we're starting to see it. So I'm hopeful that we can get there. We have just about 3 minutes left. Tell us, if you could give everybody watching a key takeaway, a piece of advice on how they can personally continue to adapt in a really challenging, unprecedented time. What would you tell people? What would you recommend?
One is I ask people to look at their behaviors in the midst of COVID, for their individual behaviors, their family behaviors, and even their organization's behaviors, and try to glean the best of this mess. Like what are these adaptation practices that we've been thrust into, whether it's greater comfort with technology, the ability to wear, business up top and party down below. If you're wearing shorts, I'm not, but if you are, like, what are these things that you've done in the midst of COVID? Have you stretched yourself and said, in this time of uncertainty, I'm going to learn additional skills? Well, when we're outside of COVID, keep pushing yourself to learn additional skills. If the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter have moved you to be more of an activist in the midst of this, then keep that activist mindset. Like whatever we've learned in the midst of chaos, I think that's the challenge with a lot of human nature, is once we are out of the chaos, we have a tendency to revert back to the status quo. Let's not revert back to the status quo. I know so many people have said, I can't wait to get back to a semblance of normal. Honestly, normal wasn't that good pre-COVID, right? We're not getting back, we'll never get back to normal. Let's get back to the new reality or the adapted reality, and realize that this is COVID-19. There could be a COVID-20 and a 21. We lose, in the city of St. Louis, there have been 50 people murdered just this month, right? Those are 50 lives that no longer get to adapt. How do we adapt our criminal justice system so no more lives are lost? We have to take this crisis and not let it be in vain.
I appreciate that. I think, I really like using the time, maybe using this time to figure out how you can make a better contribution, and whatever that means to you, whatever that means in your community, whatever that means in your personal life. So I appreciate that. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I think we got all of the audience questions. Travis, this is really great. It's so lovely to talk to you, and the work you're doing is so critically important. I think what Wexford does is so interesting, and this is what we need. We need more of it in Philadelphia and in cities all over the nation, really all over the world, building these hubs that really allow people to fully realize their potential and build that support system that you talked about. And that's what places like the Science Center Venture Cafe are doing, and what you're doing at Wexford. So thanks for the time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for everybody participating. This was great. And thank you, Michelle, for a great chat and moderation.
Yeah, good to chat with you. We're going to turn it back over to Tracy.
Thanks so much, Travis and Michelle. Michelle, you did an amazing job moderating. It was a really fun, very fast introduction to the day. Travis, I've had the good fortune of knowing you for a number of years, and I always get amazing nuggets from you. And I loved that not only were there business nuggets in terms of thinking about evolution to revolution, but then there was also the personal nuggets. And, they say it takes 28 days to form a new habit. So we've well into our 28 days of COVID. So hopefully some of those behaviors and some of those adaptations that we were forced to make will actually internalize on a personal level as well. So thanks again for your, conversation and great nuggets of advice. I'm now delighted to introduce Venture Cafe Philadelphia's new program manager and experience designer, Gary Johnson. Gary recently joined us from a role at the University of Delaware's Horn Entrepreneurship Program and was the founder and director of the First Founders Accelerator. We're excited to have him join the team, and he will lead the next section of the program. So on to you, Gary.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Travis, as well. That was an amazing discussion. I want to give a very special shout out to Horn Entrepreneurship at the University of Delaware. I'm seeing a great representation of people here today. Thank you all for showing up and supporting. That really means a lot. That is where I learned a lot about adaptation and pivoting through an entrepreneurial mindset. So thank you again. So next up, we're going to listen to 3 individuals talk about adaptation at their organizations. We're going to start off with each person giving us a brief introduction, a synopsis of their companies and organizations, and how they've leaned into adaptation over the past few months. All right, so we have with us today Michael Banks, the Managing Director of Employment Opportunities and Entrepreneurship at the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. Thank you for joining us, Michael. We also have Ann Nevins, President of PIDC. Thank you for joining us, Ann. And we have Yossi Levy, co-founder and CEO of Get a Car. Thank you for joining us, Yossi. Michael, we're going to ask that you kick us off, and we're going to let you start with your lightning talk.
Sure. I love being first at no one ever. Right? So Michael Banks with the United Way. Been there for a little bit over a year now. And I guess the answer to some of the questions that we were discussing today with regards to adaptation, what the United Way specifically has done is really to change the mission and the focus of the organization, where we really have a singular focus to fight intergenerational poverty. And that is something that has been different from what we started off almost 100 years ago. And the thing I think that was probably the most challenging, or I would say what we learned in the process, is that what was already discussed earlier, change is not easy, right? It's easy to say you want to change. It's easy to write down you want to change, but to actually implement and be the change is really difficult. And you learn a lot of things along the way. And one of the things that I think that we're learning to do well is learning, again, this is so funny hearing these conversations, is how to pivot to become a better organization, not being stuck in our old ways, so that we can become and do the things that we set out to do. So I probably had a really quick lightning talk, and I'll pass it off to the next person.
That's why it's called a lightning talk. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. Thank you, Michael. Next up, we'll go to Ann.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. It's great to get to follow Michael in this lightning round, as he and I have had an opportunity to be working together closely recently on some ways that not only United Way, but PIDC and others, I think, are going to be looking to adapt and change, particularly in the area of how we focus around equitable entrepreneurship in Philadelphia. So I think we'll probably talk about that a little bit later, but I guess I would say, just by way of introduction, that I had the great honor and good fortune of being able to take over my current role at PIDC at the end of January of this year. So the theme of adaptation is pretty near and dear to my heart in these last 6 months, because I will definitely say that as much as I thought about, risks or downsides when thinking about, whether this job was something I even wanted to apply for or to pursue, this goes beyond my wildest imagination in terms of the operating environment that PIDC would be acting in at the moment. But that being said, it is also a huge, huge point of pride for me that our team has been able to adapt and operate the way that they have through this whole situation. And I could not be more proud, of everybody individually, but also kind of the collective organization, because I do think that we have really tried to pivot and adapt in a way that is as responsive as possible to the needs of the community, and taking a time to listen and learn from our mistakes and do better. And normally that process might be very slow and thoughtful, and we evaluate a program and it takes months and years, and then the next thing we do a couple of years later. Well, no, this has been all in a matter of like weeks and months. We can say, okay, we did this. This is what worked well about it. This is what we did not get right. Let's fix it, and fix it quickly, so that the next thing that we're going to do, we don't make that same mistake again. And, and I'm really proud of our team for being kind of self-aware and self-reflective of the things that we have and haven't done well. And, looking for those ways to constantly improve and try to do better and serve our community better as we, move to the next thing. So like Michael, I'll stop it there, and I'm sure we'll get into lots of questions.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, Ann. All right, Yossi, we're coming to you next.
I appreciate it. How are you guys doing? So again, I'm Yossi Levy, co-founder and CEO of getacar.com. Getacar.com, for those who don't know, we're an e-commerce website for buying used cars. And so we were actually started in Philly. I grew up as a second generation immigrant in Philly, working alongside my father at a traditional dealership. Really learned the ins and outs of this massive $840 billion industry, and realized that, hey, this process really needs some uplift. That's to sum it up in a sense. But fast forward to 2018. I really had a self-reflection with myself after we had grown our traditional business. And I said, like, there has to be a better way to do this. Consumers, simply expect better nowadays. As I mentioned, like 1 in 10 consumers in the country, 1 in 10 people in the country buy a car each year. And it can't be that such an important purchase of someone's life has to suck and be so antiquated and be very opaque and a terrible experience. And so I set out to build an online platform that we could solve that. And we did just that. So Getacar launched in August of 2018. Initially, we launched in Philadelphia. Today, we're delivering in PA, Jersey, New York, Delaware, Maryland, and DC, and scaling very quickly. And really, at the core of it, what we do, what's really special about us, there's 44,000 traditional car dealers in the country. There's about 3 online, so e-commerce car retailers. And what we do very differently is that we're the fastest online auto retailer out of anyone. And so, compared to our peers, we were able to get someone a car within 24 to 48 hours, no matter what car it is. And they can actually go through our process in as little as 12 minutes, as opposed to a traditional dealership where the industry average is 5.4 hours. So we're really just, put the consumer in our mind and asking, how can we make this the best experience possible for such an important purchase of someone's life?
Awesome. Thank you, Yossi. Really appreciate that. So moving along, and just so everyone knows, we're adapting to this virtual environment as well. Typically, this would be in person, and we'd be sort of, vibing off of each other's body language and all that kind of good stuff. So we're trying our best over Zoom right now. And with that being said, I would love for this to definitely be more of a conversation between panelists. So we have a list of questions that I'm going to ask, but we're also going to ask that all of our attendees submit their questions in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A section at the end, we can ask your questions for you, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself. So with that being said, our first question is, as an organization, when do you decide that you need to actually adapt to change? And this can be for any of our panelists. You can jump in if you want to, and then we'll sort of go down the line from there.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I don't think, from my experience, I don't think it's necessarily a deliberate decision or an explicit decision. I just think that, it's really important for me to instill the culture within the company that, we want to try different things. That's really the only way you innovate. I think the stat is like 9 out of 10 experiments fail or something like that. But, for me, it's a big focus on when we bring someone on board, instilling a lot of confidence in them right away from the get-go. That's my style of leadership, that, you know, it's either you win or you learn. And if we're not going to try different things, we wouldn't be here today. If we didn't wake up and say, hey, you know, the current car buying process is simply broken and we could do better, we wouldn't try. And so I just think that at least for me, it's a very cultural dynamic. And I try to constantly instill that in the team so that we just keep adapting, keep thinking of newer things and just becoming better.
And that's where I wish I'd had this panel and talked to Yossi before I took my current job and had all these grand plans of, you know, here's the way in which we can intentionally, you know, change and thoughtfully strategize about how we should change and what do we need to do differently. And, you know, I don't want to say that there's no place for, you know, thought and strategy. And I know, Yossi, that's not what you were saying either. But I do feel like that what we've gone through in the last 6 months or 5 months definitely has, you know, been a big lesson for me in not always, you know, being able to kind of control everything or plan everything and execute it in just the way that you think you might. And frankly, as I said, you know, being really proud of our team and how well everybody has adapted. We have made more loans. We made more loans in a month, maybe 6 weeks, than we typically do in a year when we were working to put out some of the COVID relief fund dollars. We're probably going to do that again in a next wave. So we didn't set out to do that. That wasn't part of, you know, a grand plan of thinking about how we would adapt. We saw the need, tried to do our best to respond to it, and in responding to the need, I think we really challenged ourselves to say, what is it about our typical process and ways of doing things that maybe wouldn't have worked in that situation? And how can we not let those be barriers to getting resources to those that need them? And then, as I said, I think we've kind of taken lessons from doing that one time and then being able to apply every time we kind of do it. We're, you know, trying to do it better. So I do feel like, you know, maybe had this all not happened, we would have been looking to you know, implement some strategic changes throughout the organization, and we probably again would have been going through an extensive and thoughtful and board engaged, you know, process around that. But by learning by doing, I actually think it's, you know, more quickly made us a lot better, at least at certain things.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I think a lot of my thoughts around adaptation really has manifested from my time spent on Wall Street. And what I learned on Wall Street was that if you're not adapting, you're just not going to be relevant for a long period of time. And I think oftentimes organizations get in trouble too. They see things like what I call lagging indicators, like your revenue or membership, or these other KPIs that people focus on as if they're leading indicators. And when those numbers start to lag off or they start to drop down, it's often too late. So you have to be forward thinking about, where does my product fit in the market? How do I remain relevant? How do I continue to have an organization 5, 10, 20 years from now? And I'm blanking on the gentleman's name earlier, but I laughed when he mentioned Blockbuster. I often talk about Blockbuster. I talk about Circuit City. I talk about Eastman Kodak, because when I was a trader, I watched all those companies go out of business because they were unaware of the invisible competitor. They were unaware of the fact that they needed to adapt. And they kind of got in their own way, because a lot of times you can have a legacy organization and you think that your customer is going to be your customer forever. But oftentimes the customer is going to go to the organization or to the place that's going to answer and serve their need. So if you're not forward thinking, if you're not thinking about your clients, you're not thinking about your customers, and that's not a part of your culture, you're never going to adapt. And as a result of that, you're going to be on the sideline, and you're going to be in somebody's bankruptcy court because you haven't thought about or taken into consideration, why did you start, why you're in business, and why does someone want to do business with you?
And I might pick up on something that Mike just said too about, you know, if you're not listening to your customers. I think one of the things that, you know, as Philadelphia's economic development organization, I think we need to be constantly challenging ourselves about, who are our customers? Who are our clients? Who are we trying to, you know, serve and reach with our resources? And I think, again, the context of COVID-19, as well as the sort of reckoning and the civil unrest and the uprising around systemic racism in our society broadly, but bring that specifically to Philadelphia, I think have really made us, sort of really challenged us to think more strategically about who are we trying to serve, and how are we ensuring that the resources that we are trying to deliver are in fact well matched for the needs of those who we are trying to serve. So I think just that almost redefining, expanding, thinking, more broadly about who our clients are as we then, do what Mike says in terms of actually, listening to them and trying to be forward thinking.
Awesome, thank you. And Anne, just to stick with you for a second, I feel like change and creative adaptation may be easier said than done. Could you share maybe one of the struggles that your organization may have faced in trying to adapt to this new normal?
Absolutely, and there have certainly been many. I think, kind of going back to the idea that everybody has been doing everything in this remote environment. And I think that on the one hand, that has led to adaptation in and of itself. We've figured out these Zooms and, different ways of connecting with people, maybe in some ways more efficiently time-wise than maybe you even do when you're running around to meetings and even walking around the office and talking to folks in person. But I do think that the efficiency can allow you to lose something in terms of the informal collaboration, the thought process, and just that interpersonal engagement of when you're starting something new and you're trying to do something that is different, getting everybody on board and understanding the why, and also, ultimately the how. So I definitely feel like that has been a struggle to to work in that type of environment where we are trying to do so many, new things at once. And so I think one of the things that we sort of quickly learned is that it's really important, in addition to keeping everybody going full steam ahead on the core work and all of these things that we're pressing each other to do and do even more quickly, and at a higher volume than we typically do. I think keeping the interpersonal, figuring out ways to get the teams together socially, where we're not talking about work, we're just seeing each other's faces, and maybe sharing bright spots and getting to thank each other for just the little things that people might do for each other, or a kindness that somebody offered, work related or not work related. So I think one of the challenges that we had was sort of maintaining, and frankly, even in some ways because of our leadership transition, trying to build somewhat of a new culture while not actually getting to be able to see each other in person in this environment. So that I feel like has been a challenge that we have tried to find ways to work through some of those social mechanisms, and I think that will be really important too as we try to understand how long we might be operating, like this, and that's kept changing as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Anne. Yossi, how about you? Are there any struggles that your company has faced in adapting to this new environment?
I think every day is a struggle. No, but it's when I guess it's just different challenges on a daily basis. And I think what I've learned is that one of the most important things to do is surround yourself with good people, and people that complement you. And so I think that there's been a lot of challenges. I mean, we're an ops business. We have logistics. We have warehouses, we have supply chain. So there's a lot that needed to change, especially to protect our team, to protect customers. So that's from the more the tactical stuff. But I think that we have the right people in the right seats. and we were able to, you know, overcome everything. And specifically, I would say in end of March, it was very difficult because we actually had to be completely shut down because that was the state order. So, you know, those are the type of things that really build culture. In those types of times, we just try to over communicate, be very transparent. And, you know, when you don't know it, you just tell the team, hey, we don't know what's going to happen. And that's the reality of things, you know, being very forthcoming. But, you know, like I said, just to sum it up, just making sure that, you know, the right people that we trust are, you know, making the right decisions. And so it's in such a rapidly changing environment when we have so many movements happening in a day. You know, there's a ton of challenges that come up, and, you know, you overcome it. So.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Yossi. I can only imagine how stressful that is in the startup realm. I can only imagine. But Michael, I see you nodding your head over there. Has this been resonating with you? Are you experiencing similar struggles, or are there unique challenges that you're facing in your organization?
So I would say I look at this, you know, through several lenses, right, Gary? Because I had the fortune of, you know, again, working at a startup, working at an organization that had legacy, and then now coming to the United Way. And so I'll speak more about the last two experiences, one at the African American Chamber of Commerce, where I was for 3.5 years leading that organization, and then also at the United Way. So my perspective at the African American Chamber of Commerce was different in that, you know, we knew we had to adapt because people would ask, why should I become a member of the chamber? Why is this organization even relevant? And that's a hard thing to sometimes answer if you're not willing to become uncomfortable. So one of the things I did in that particular role was we just started asking a bunch of questions, because again, I think it becomes problematic when you think that your organization has the answers, does not need to adapt, does not need to go back to the client and customer and say, what do you need today? Because you can start off 25 years ago with a mission that no longer fits the market. So being able to go back and ask some different questions kind of forced us to adapt, because again, it was just tough for us to have people become a part of the organization, to care about the organization. And as a result of those things, the corporations weren't even really engaged with us. And I think through the lens of an employee within United Way, it becomes a challenge, because again, you're the new person in the organization, right? You're coming to try to launch a work that has not been done there. And then the United Way runs into the same thing, because we're 98, 99 years old, and people see the United Way as one way. So when you go out and you tell people you're different, they shrug, they want to look at you the way that you've always been, and they like to go to the thing that makes them comfortable. And I think one of the good examples of that, particularly in Philadelphia, is Xfinity. You know, I may say Xfinity, but most people want to say Comcast, right? They're like, I don't care what you call it, it's Comcast. I'm going to call it Comcast because I have a problem with my cable. And it's just really hard for people to say or to accept that you're different and that you're doing something that is relevant today, because there's oftentimes get caught up in who you used to be. So yeah, I'll stop.
I will just say that my 5 and 9-year-olds totally go with Xfinity. I probably still say Comcast, but they know it as Xfinity.
I totally agree. Awesome. So Anne, if we could stick with you again, you know, when we're living in an unpredictable environment like this during this pandemic, how do you adapt your usual forecasting and sort of financial modeling and the analysis that you have to do maybe on a daily basis? How does that relate to, you know, how your strategic planning has to adapt moving forward?
Absolutely. It is night and day different. So as, you know, as I mentioned before, like coming into a new leadership position, you've got all these thoughts and ideas of, you know, how you're going to do strategic planning and think long term. And, you know, I was thinking, okay, we actually are just in the process now of wrapping up a PIDC 2020 plan that was sort of a 3-year strategic plan. And I think I see my old boss, John Grady, on this Zoom. So thanks to John's leadership, you know, we have our 2020 plan. And, you know, I was thinking, okay, are we thinking PIDC 2025, 2030. Now I'm like, okay, what's PIDC tomorrow? We have like a tomorrow plan and, you know, a next week plan. But I think we also, you know, really have to continue to stay focused on that long term and ensure that even though we have to really make quick and strategic decisions almost, you know, daily and immediately now, how we make those decisions and where we decide to put resources and how we decide to focus our efforts absolutely is going to have a long-term impact in terms of how we come out of this. And so I think, keeping in mind some of the foundational issues and challenges that we had already in Philadelphia before the pandemic even started. I mean, we talked about the reckoning and the civil uprising related to systemic racism. Well, we can see, we already had seen in the data that Black and Brown owned businesses were not at a scale in Philadelphia that anywhere nearly approximates equity in terms of population, but also even relative to peer cities with, similar demographic mix. So something like that, that's, that research already exists. That data has been looked at. We don't need to reinvent the wheel to know that fact and keep that at the forefront as we make decisions today about, okay, if we've got a Restart Philadelphia loan fund that we're going to put out, let's make sure that at least, and I think it's going to be significantly more, but we've committed to at least 50% of those resources going to historically disadvantaged businesses. So 51% or more owned by Black, Hispanic, Asian or Asian American, Native American, or Pacific Islander individuals. And so again, we didn't do a lot of research that was that led us to that decision. We didn't go out and do a study, and all that. The work has been done, and so I think we were able to sort of keep the data in mind to make the decision quickly today about how we're going to deploy the resources that we have, and hopefully kind of pull ourselves out of this on a different trajectory than we were coming into this.
Awesome, thank you, Ann. Yossi, how about you? How has this unpredictable environment affected your strategic planning at getacar.com?
So when everything started, we spoke with our board, with our investors, and we just said, like, scrap our entire plan. It's garbage. But it was, that was the reality of things. Like, we couldn't forecast a week out. Although, since then things have, stabilized a little bit, I guess, at least in our industry. And so we've been able to put some additional planning in place, but, we're well aware that, I think they say, like, the smartest people can tell what's going on now, and like no one can tell what's going to happen in the future. So, we're just trying to stick with our current plan as much as we can. And, right now things are holding up very well. The car industry has rebounded like crazy. People are not taking vacations, not flying, traveling. So, they get cars, they want to go somewhere. And, new car manufacturers were shut down for a couple months. So there's a shortage of new cars. So that's more reasons to come, to our industry. And then more than all of that, people want to buy it in a safe way. You don't want to go to a packed showroom, so you use a service like Get a Car. So it's really been that it's really been that simple, really, for us. We just looking through kind of what were our plans. Yes, we have some tailwinds right now, but what are the leading indicators that we can follow through with, and working with our board in just a transparent manner to try to project as much as possible and plan around that. So, but it's very difficult, and especially in this environment, it's not getting any easier. So, like, you just got to do your best.
Awesome, thanks, Yossi. So, Michael, how about you? How have you been able to adapt your strategic planning at the United Way?
Yeah, so I think that this was an interesting environment that we found ourselves in. On the one hand, I would say in this, and I don't say this lightly, the positive that came out, I think, of this experience was it validated the work that we're trying to do, particularly as it relates to communities of color, women entrepreneurs and immigrant entrepreneurs, and it really showed that we're not just saying this, and it's not just as a feeling, and this is not something that we're just we think is taking place. But it's been accelerated by the extent of COVID. It was accelerated by the extent of all the civil unrest of what businesses are being impacted the most, and how the wealth gap continues to widen and continue to be transferred to organizations that are not minorities, that are not, women-owned businesses, that are not, immigrant-owned businesses. So I think that was one of the things that came out of it. And I think the other piece was, it really put on our radar the need to really focus on how to not make an entrepreneur of color or women or immigrant business, crisis proof, but how to position yourself if you find yourself in that type of environment again. Because I think, what happens every 100 years or so, the last one, 1918, right? So it's not one of those things that are top of mind, but it has changed our approach to the work that we're doing alongside the Commerce Department, alongside PIDC, to really think about in the future state, how do you help better position this particularly segment of entrepreneurs to go through a shock such as this? So I think that's the adaptation that we have made.
Awesome. So then sticking with the United Way for a second, Michael, could you explain a little bit about how the United Way decided to narrow its mission to increase the focus on ending intergenerational poverty within Philadelphia?
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't there when they first did it, right? But I can tell you what I know since I've been there for a little bit over a year, and being fortunate to have sat on the board. It's one of those things where you have a conversation, you have to be honest about what is your mission and what are you achieving, right? So they're like, okay, well, we want to be everything to everyone. That doesn't work anymore. So we were like, what's the saying that my mother says? You're a mile wide and an inch deep, right? Instead of having that focus, let's focus on 5 things, right? And really get really good at those things and see if we can really drive down the poverty numbers in the city of Philadelphia. But you're not going to do that if you're looking at everything. It's like anything else in life, like you got to have a focus. So for the United Way, it was just coming up with a focus that was a better fit for the market, that was going to allow us to solve the problems for the community that we said we care about. Because if we care about them, our resources, our time, our talent, our attention should be focused on those things so that we can start to help them recreate a narrative that matches other individuals that are not being left behind. So yeah, that's how, that's been the experience of the United Way.
Yeah. Awesome. And could you share a little bit about how that shift has been working, and or have you had to make changes in that short time frame that you made?
Yeah. So it was definitely some retooling of the organization. We had some folks that were laid off, and there were some folks that were added to the team, and it's been hard, right? Because you don't know what you don't know until you start to do something. Right. And the organization is learning as we go. It's one of those things I think it takes a little bit longer than most people anticipate on the front end. But I would say that the early indicators are positive for us. And we're really looking forward to what this city looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And the last thing I'll say around that, Gary, is one of the things that's on the website, right? We talk about this concept of the Philly Shrug. And unfortunately, that happens so often in the city that people are not connected to poverty, not connected to people that are struggling. And as a result of that, either A, they don't think that it exists and no one's going through that, or B, they're like, not my problem, right? So we want to use our platform and want to use our voice to make sure that this community that was being left behind, problems, issues, and things that we're going through was elevated. So yeah, I'll stop there and allow you to answer more questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. All right. So Yossi, coming back to you, you already mentioned a little bit about sort of how people's car buying behavior has shifted, right? And they're already looking at you as a safer option. Have you found that you still have to help the community sort of understand like the value that you provide in this environment, or do they resonate with it sort of right away?
No, so that's that's definitely something that we discussed though. Before the pandemic, we, for us, it was a bit from a marketing perspective, it was, hey, we're an easier way to purchase a car. You should try us out. We're better. After or during when the pandemic started, we kind of shifted that. It was more of like, hey, we think you already agree and that this is the right way to buy a car now. But by the way, we're the best at it. So we did definitely change that narrative just a bit, because of the pandemic. And then since then, just all the data has been very favorable. Like conversion has been better. So it seems like people are a little bit less apprehensive, to try this out, and they realize that it is really a much, it really fits the times we're in. And some things, but that said, there is still some apprehension. I'm sure there's some people on this call right now that are saying, I wouldn't buy a car online, because I said the same thing myself. And so what we do to mitigate that is we do certain things like we give people a 7-day return policy, right? So that's industry leading. So yeah, you get a car, for any reason you don't like it, you return it for free. We pick it up, not $1 to your from your pocket. And then in addition to that, we do let people test drive upon a delivery of a car. We provide, a lot of warranties and, other protections that way. So I think when you kind of, bundle all that together, in addition to just having a really good reputation, a great online reviews, people are able to bridge that gap and say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot because I have this need, and I think that this might be the right way to do it. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Yossi. So Anne, sort of shifting gears a little bit, how would you rate Philadelphia as a community in its ability to adapt overall?
Sorry, just realized I was on mute. I was interested in the prior conversation because I feel like a version of that question was asked to the last speaker, and it sort of made me think a little bit differently about my answer to to this for Philadelphia. And I feel like it's really hard to kind of, whether it's a whole country or even just a big city, I sort of feel like it's almost hard to answer that question because it is, at least the way I naturally think about adaptability, either in two ways. One is sort of that personal, like psychological, individual, sense of it. Or I think of it almost at like the macro level in terms of, definitely from my vantage point, more focused on the economy. So I think that if I had to look back in, the history of Philadelphia, maybe from at least the founding of PIDC to today, which is the last 62 years, I could see a lot of kind of the macro adaptations that have been made, transitioning from a primarily manufacturing economic base to the, wide mix that we have today, particularly, with our strengths in education and medicine, specific physical areas of the city where we've had success when we've been intentional and had resources available to drive development in a certain way. I think the Navy Yard certainly comes to mind, and we had a really exciting day yesterday of announcing the next phase of adaptation at the Navy Yard, where I think we've got an amazing opportunity not only to continue the growth and momentum, but to really do that in a way that specifically puts diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront in terms of the great team that's been selected to move that forward, and how they're thinking of that creatively across all aspects, not just, certainly the ownership matters a lot, and the ownership I think in this instance is really strong in terms of the MBE participation, but I think the way the whole team is thinking about it and the way PIDC is thinking about it is that flows through every aspect of what we're going to see at the Navy Yard going forward, including the business opportunities, the tenancy. So I see, the Navy Yard in general as a great kind of adaptation story for Philadelphia, with a next chapter, yet to be written, that can hopefully, kind of take that in an even more exciting direction. So I think, so that's kind of the macro. And when it gets to the sort of adaptability of the people, I don't know, I guess, I kind of come back to the notion that, I know we don't always like to use this word from like a marketing perspective, but grit and sort of that tenacity to kind of hang in there. I don't know how that relates as much to adaptability, but maybe that's a next evolution that we can strive towards, as a city.
Awesome. Yeah, we're working on it. Awesome. So then, and just to follow up, but more from an organizational leadership perspective. How can an organization's leadership communicate a need for change to their employees, sort of while helping them understand that either nothing is wrong or that things are going to be okay at the end of the day, and that they should feel comfortable in voicing a need for that change.
Yeah, I like the end part of your question, because I was actually going to start there in terms of, I think it's less about, the organizational leadership, kind of voicing a need for change kind of down into the organization, and more taking the opportunity to listen from what's bubbling up from the organization as a whole. That's probably going to lead you as a leader to better understand where change maybe needs to come. And certainly I think that's internal and related to how the organization itself kind of operates with respect to its own team and culture. But I also think that that's true of keeping the pulse on what's happening externally, because again, with PIDC as the example, it's not me directly that has the most contact every single day with our clients. That might be somebody on our portfolio management team who has spent every single day of the last 4 months on the phone, on emails, on Zooms, hearing from the hundreds of businesses that we have in our client portfolio about what they're going through, what's happening with their business, why they might not be able to pay their loan, right now, when they think they might be able to pay it, and why they think things might be getting better. That person on our portfolio management team is going to have probably 1,000 times better direct perspective than I do about what is really going on the ground with small businesses across Philadelphia. Same, of the folks on our business lending team who are talking to people about what new funding that they might need, and how and why now might or might not be, the right time to, to do what they're trying to do. So I think, whether it's understanding kind of that internal piece, how an organization might need to shift to better meet the needs of our own team and organization, and also what's going on outside, and what do we really need to be thinking about. I think listening as a leader is probably a lot of what needs to happen first before there's any need to kind of communicate this way. If you do that, once you are communicating, here are the changes, or here are the things that we're going to do going forward, I think then it should be something that at least most folks are already going to be bought into, and they're going to be saying, yeah, I told you so. Yeah, of course, this is right. You hope.
Awesome. Thank you. And Yossi, how about you? How does that work for you at getacar.com with incorporating that feedback, those unique experiences and insights from employees, and how do you make sure that there is that culture there where your team feels like they can voice their opinions?
So, like some tactical examples is when COVID started, we began doing a weekly all hands, which at some points maybe felt a little bit repetitive, but the intent was, we're physically not apart. We want to give people opportunity to kind of, voice certain things and, maybe over communicate because we're not together. And so, I think this is it's one of those things that comes back to, the culture that you really, resonate down to the team, and really putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Like they can be instances where someone might, this is again, very specific example, but someone will send me something or something that they notice in a company or, where we can change. And then I'll tell them deliberately, I'll say, hey, can you send this in like a general Slack channel, or can you bring this up during our all hands? So then, sometimes the most important person is, the person that, not necessarily the first person that speaks up, but sometimes it's the second person that also says something. And then people start, really understanding, okay, this is accepted here. We can, we can be open, we can be transparent, and, just, you do all these things. I think at the end of the day, it's, it pays back dividends, figuratively speaking and literally, I guess, but because people really feel empowered. And at the end of the day, you strip out the processes, the systems. I mean, it's people. I think I would even say I was maybe naive in the beginning when I started of just how important good people were to an organization's success. But I think that, like it's just been a really important pillar for us. And, when like it starts from, it's a bunch of little things, like it's not one silver bullet, but it's a lot of little actions that make up the greater culture where people can say these kind of things and it's very transparent.
Yeah, totally agree. And I love that. I feel like over communicating right now is a necessity. There's so much that just gets lost, in translation in the virtual space. So I definitely appreciate that. Michael, how about you? How's that work for you with your team at United Way?
Yeah, if you don't mind, can I pivot a little bit? Because it was something you said at the end, at the beginning about change that I wanted to give some insight to with regards to how I view the city as an agent of change or as changing from a different perspective, kind of. I think that it depends on where you're at in the city and what you're doing. And the reason I say that is because I think that we're not doing a good job holistically as a city. And the reason I say that is because we look at data like from 1970 to 2015, you measure poverty. It's only one area in the city of Philadelphia that has improved as it relates to poverty numbers, and that's the Center City District. Every other district has either doubled, tripled, and in some cases quadrupled as it relates to how people are being devastated by poverty. So you can have an area where we could have a whole number of poverty in Philadelphia around that, what is it, 24.5 or 25.6, whatever the number is. But when you disaggregate that, you look at where poverty and who's is impacted, you go have an area like Fair Hill has 80% poverty, right? 50% of that, which is deep poverty. So if you ask that question to those individuals and not necessarily the people are on this call and in the business community, they're gonna say that we're failing because my neighborhood and the neighborhood I come out of in North Philadelphia is either the same or worse, where you still don't have grocery stores, you still don't have banks. You have a ton of check cashing places. Crime is still just ridiculous, right? And people are still not being put on a path of home ownership. So when you think about it that way, and that's the way I approach these type of conversations, because I feel like I have to talk about the community that I come out of. Philadelphia has not been good at change for all. They've been changed for a select few and for a small segment of our population, but it has been failing the city overall for everybody that calls this place home and that wants to have a pathway of upward mobility. So I hope you don't mind me pivoting, but that was something I just wanted to share because, again, I got the ear of a lot of people and it's important for me to be the voice of a community that I come out of.
I totally agree. I think for every success story that we can look back on and say, this was a great example of, something that has transformed successfully. There's many more examples where that has not happened and where not only, not only are people not better off, in fact, in a lot of cases, they're actually worse off on a relative scale. And I think that, increase in the inequality, I mean, we see it obviously nationally, not just in Philadelphia, but I think that is something that we have yet to reckon with and figure out, comprehensively what are the strategies that we need and what is the scale of resources. And I know, Mike, from talking to your boss and talking to you, some of that is, I think you said something about like the shrug, and the idea of like, well, it's too much. Like it's, what can we do? Because it's like so big, but I'm with you that like that's absolutely, it's big and it's daunting, but I think we have to do more, and I think we can do more with everybody working kind of strategically together. And I have seen actually a lot of that and a lot more of that in this current environment than than I think I was seeing previously. So that may be a little bit of a silver lining where people, I think, have realized that the scale of the crisis, I mean, certainly the immediate crisis, in addition to the long-term crisis that we had already been facing, is such that nobody's doing anything alone. Like we have to be coming together and pooling resources and just approaching things in a new way.
Awesome. Thank you both. Yep. I respect a good pivot. So thank you. Thank you, Michael. But sticking with that sort of final thought and final question from me before we get into Q&A, so we're talking a little bit about the importance of including diverse perspectives at the tables where decisions are being made, right? So recently, United Way, PIDC, and the city have partnered on an entrepreneurship strategy project. Could either Anne or Michael, could you give us a little insight into what that process is like in engaging different organizations, pulling them together and trying to execute on a shared goal?
I'm gonna let Michael take the lead on that because he has been taking the lead.
No, I appreciate that. I think what has been amazing about this journey, Gary, first and foremost, I think that anytime you set out to do an initiative, it's important to be able to identify what your strengths and weaknesses are within your organization. And if you're not strong at something, you don't have to be strong. You can find a partner that's strong at that, and work alongside them. But for whatever reason, it doesn't happen too often. So we're grateful to work alongside PIDC. We're grateful to work alongside the Commerce Department on such an important initiative that's really going to impact a lot of communities that once again have been left behind. But I think what has been the driving factor or the driving force, if you will, for this relationship is trust, right? These are organizations that we're all pivoting, we're all trying to become better, we're all trying to do great work, and we realize the importance of collaboration. And from day one, I know Anne has been amazing at allowing me to work with members of her team, even when she could not be there, to make sure that the work was moving forward. And it's the same thing that's happening in the Commerce Department. I literally have probably worked with 8 people at the Commerce Department to make sure that this work continues on the right track. And to date, it has been an amazing experience. And I think we've moved a lot further along in a short amount of time than anyone could have anticipated, but that would not have happened without partnerships and without the trust that we've been able to establish on the front end.
And I think too, just to give Michael a lot of credit in terms of the United Way's role in this, I feel like one of the things that has been really important in this process, and Gary, your question was really about like, how do we make sure that the right voices are at the table? So I think, Michael personally is somebody that has a lot of credibility with the entrepreneurs in the communities that we are trying to reach through this initiative. So whether we're talking about minority-owned businesses, again, women-owned businesses, immigrant-owned businesses, we've been particularly focusing on Black and Brown-owned businesses. And I think, based on Mike's experience at the Chamber, the African American Chamber that he referenced, and bringing that credibility to the United Way, which has been, which is new to this work. So it kind of gives a little bit of like, there's not a lot of history, with the United Way as an organization. Like Michael has personal credibility combined with an organization that doesn't have like baggage or, sort of past, too much past history that can really, I think, bring that best of both worlds and get the right people engaged to get those direct perspectives at the table, and also have them be like open, honest, and candid. And I think, Mike as a person really draws that out of folks, and that's been really important.
Totally agree. Michael's great. Okay, so thank you all. Before we go into the Q&A portion, and hopefully everyone listening right now has some good questions that they'd like to ask. Anne, Yossi, and Michael, are there any projects that you would like for our attendees to know about? And I saw you shared a link in the chat. Did you want to just very quickly sort of share what that is?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. So one of the things that we had worked on, again, like new collaboration, I think, with our colleagues at the City Commerce Department, and also with Philadelphia Works, which is the workforce development agency. And I think it was mentioned before, I think one of the last speakers mentioned the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative as a great, example of workforce development. That's something where I think, this idea that economic development and workforce development have often kind of operated on parallel but separate sort of tracks, and we're trying to bring those much more closely together. One of the ways that we're doing that is through some joint strategy, not necessarily strategic planning, but thinking strategically together. And so we had come up with kind of a 4-phase framework in terms of how we were going to move out of and get Philadelphia sort of back on track and hopefully in a different trajectory coming out of the pandemic. And the 4 phases were respond, really focused around those immediate relief efforts starting in March, and then restart. So as we're able to get back open, how do we help people just get going again? And then recharge, which is really about getting people back into growth mode. So how do we move from just kind of like sustaining, just getting going again, just reopening, to like really focusing on growth? And then last but not least, reimagine. So how can we really rethink some of the things that we're doing? And I think this is where, the work that Mike talked about with the United Way and PIDC and Commerce, that reimagining of that entrepreneurship ecosystem and how we work with people, that's really where that comes into play. So for the restart phase, which is essentially now, we had done some work both internally with our team, again, trying to listen, to the folks on the ground and take their expertise and pull that into our strategies, as well as working with our clients and doing listening sessions to sort of hear directly from clients about what they were going through, and pulled that into a restart kind of framework. It's aligned with our 3 core existing strategies, but we've basically taken those 3 core strategies and said, okay, in this restart phase for Philadelphia's economy, what are our specific commitments? What is PIDC going to do? And I feel like, Gary, you might have said this in the beginning, either Gary or Mike, you said in the beginning about, really putting not just talking about change, but really like putting that into action and actually seeing it. So one of the things that we're going to do with this recovery framework is be very transparent about like where we are and what specific initiatives and what are we doing kind of under each one of these bullet points. And we're going to do that through social media, through our blog, but that you'll be able to kind of look at that and say, okay, PIDC, you said you were going to do, this thing. What have you done? And try to be, really transparent about reporting out on that.
And I'll follow up. So, Gary, you were asking on specific initiatives. So, I welcome anyone to email me, like if you have any something specific that you think could be very impactful and complementary to our business. I'm happy to to receive emails. Specifically, what we try to do as a company is at least like once a quarter we try to engage in some creative philanthropic activity. And so like just for some context, when COVID started, we ran a program where immunocompromised people or the older people, they could actually, we would cover all their service fees for like grocery delivery and things like that. And so we were able to subsidize a lot of home delivery, free grocery delivery for people. And most recently, we donated a car to an organization called Bread in the City, which they deliver a lot of essential supplies to people's homes, food, medical supplies, stuff like that. And we did that in partnership with an NBA player, Carmelo Anthony, and it was a huge hit. It really, like in DC, like it was on the news and stuff. So it was really great. We were helping people. I mean, we got some exposure. So we were really happy about it. And so what I would say is, these type of initiatives, they start very simply. Someone reaches out to us and they bring up an opportunity, and so we absolutely welcome that. I'd be happy to share my email if anyone has any specific ideas. And then as we progress and throughout the year, and we evaluate new programs, and we always try to do something different. We don't want to if one time we're giving away a card and one time we're maybe donating food, we always try to kind of mix it up to hit different areas of the community. And so we're very much open to seeing some other ideas. And so
Hey, Garen, I'll be really brief so that we can leave time for questions. I think the thing that again, that I'm specifically working on alongside Commerce and PIDC is this Entrepreneurs of Color, Women, and Immigrants Fund that we're trying to get off the ground. And I know a lot of you may be sitting up there and you're saying to yourself, you know, Mike, I really like what you're talking about, and I just want to, you know, give money to it. So I'm just joking. But no, but seriously, all jokes aside, you know, we're really trying to get this fund off the ground because it's important for us to have what we like to call courage capital, to make sure that when we get to the point, when we've done the research, we got finished, we get through the design of the program and we go into a pilot program, that we're not just giving entrepreneurs just loans, but in an ideal world, we'd be able to give them grants, loans, and access to some really amazing professions where all those things require capital. So if you're so inclined, you want to learn more about it, I'd be more than happy to share my email to talk more about this work, and I'll stop right there.
Awesome. Thank you all. So with that being said, we have about 2 minutes for some rapid fire questions. I think we have Jake, who's been monitoring the chat. Jake, do we have any questions from the chat? If not, would anyone like to ask a question? You can go ahead and actually raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hey, Gary, nothing coming through in the chat.
Okay.
I thought I saw one about the decline of urban environments due to COVID-19 and what are the perspectives on, are cities going to decline? I think that was one.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually see.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the question is, I've seen articles about the decline of urban environments due to COVID-19. What is your perspective on that contention?
Well, I would say I certainly hope not. And, you know, I think that you know, what I'm seeing at the moment is definitely, you know, I think in the midst of the crisis, it's sort of hard to see how we're really going to emerge from this in terms of those types of long-term trends. I think you know, I think it's telling that, you know, when you talk to people, everybody talks about what they miss and, you know, the things that they are so eager to get back to doing. And I don't sense that sentiment changing dramatically. I mean, people really want to be able to go back to restaurants. They really want to be able to go get a drink, you know, out somewhere. They want to be able to, you know, connect with their friends, connect with their neighbors, take advantage of, you know, all of the assets that are not necessarily unique to cities. Certainly, you know, plenty of places in the world have those things, but I think the density that an urban environment offers, and the choice, and the, you know, the diversity of the urban environment, to me, at least, based on hearing people talk about what they miss and what they really want to get back to, I still have a lot of hope that, you know, dense urban environments will continue to remain, you know, not only relevant, but I think that people will be really excited to get to experience that again.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. And final question, how would you define community? I'll direct that toward Yossi. How would you define a community, and is there a point where, you know, a small group of people actually turns into a community?
I'm not sure. I don't know. It's a good question. I think that maybe Anne or Michael might be better at this one. It's a subtle deflection.
That's actually a perfectly acceptable answer. Yeah. So we'll leave it there. So we're gonna wrap things up, but I seriously want to thank everyone for joining us today for RAIN 2020. Thank you to Anne. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you to Tracy, Travis, and Michelle as well. I would say this was a success. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. We really appreciate it. So we hope you gained some insights and realize that we're all adapting to this new environment. We especially want to thank Independence Blue Cross and BPHL for sponsoring RAIN 2020. This would not be possible without you. So thank you again.